The earth lies. The sky remembers. Saying of the Windborn clan long before the age of kings and steel, before empires etched their borders in blood, there existed a world above the world, windswept, isolated, and unknowable to those below. Here, in the jagged altitudes of the Worldspine Mountains, a civilization flourished that defied the rules of gravity and God. They were known not by a single name, but by the winds themselves, the Sky Clans. They did not dwell in valleys or forests, but on the razor's edge of the sky, along cliffs where even eagles hesitated, and above cloud banks so thick they drowned sound. These peaks, carved by ancient storms and shaped by breath itself, were home to 7 great clans, each bound to a natural force they believed chose them at birth. The Stormfang, fierce raiders who marked their skin with lightning burns, believed combat was communion. The Cloudpiercers, high priests of altitude, lived in temples strung between peaks by bone bridges and silk cables. The Windborn, said to be able to read gusts like scripture, served as messengers and omen readers. The Thunderroot, builders and earthbinders, claimed descent from sky-broken stone. The Emberdrift, fire shamans and smiths of volatile sky metal, believed in sacrifice through flame. The Hallowspire, secret keepers and death singers, controlled funerary rites and guided the souls of the dead. And the Lost Clan, whispered but never named, known only as the Veil Walkers, erased even from memory. Each clan was distinct in rite and custom, but all held to one shared belief: to kneel is to die. The Sky Clans revered the open sky as sacred, untamed, unruled, unforgiving. The land below was spoken of only in warnings. To descend was to fall. To fall was to be forgotten. Children were raised not in cradles, but in wind nests woven from eagle feather and bone. Newborns were tested by placing them on the cliff edge overnight. If they survived the wind's judgment, they were marked as skyborn. Their calendars followed cloud patterns and wind tides, not stars. History was sung, not carved. Memory was held in breath, not ink. And every breath was sacred, for it linked the living to the first scream. The moment, the elders claimed, when the sky first split and the world below was cast away. Rituals defined daily life. Warriors trained atop swaying platforms hung by vines. Elders meditated while suspended from wind spires. Marriages were consecrated mid-glide, with both partners leaping into the void and catching each other by hand. But for all their ritual and honor, the Sky Clans were not a peaceful people. Feuds between clans ran generations deep, carried in blood and wind song. Border disputes over glider routes, sacred thermals, and storm passes sometimes erupted into aerial warfare, spears clashing midair, bone arrows streaking across canyons, and warriors vanishing into the fog with a scream and a trail of feathers. Yet through it all, a balance was kept, a violent harmony. An unspoken rule held them together. We may kill each other, but we will never descend. It was this one rule that preserved them, and it was the breaking of this rule that began the end. Fear that climbs is visible. Fear that waits is eternal. Thunderroot proverb: though the Sky Clans lived with their eyes fixed on the heavens, they spoke often of what waited below. Their legends warned of the deep beneath, a realm of silence and hunger that predated the sky itself. Children were told stories of the deep kin, beings of shadow and stone who once tried to drag the clans down into the earth, not with weapons, but with stillness. The most feared myth was that of the crawling god, a nameless creature said to sleep beneath the oldest peak. It did not devour flesh, but breath. It whispered from within rock, and those who listened long enough found their lungs frozen, not by cold, but by despair. The Cloudpiercers kept these tales buried in their wind scrolls. The Hallowspire claimed to have heard the echoes in their funeral rites. And the Thunderroot. They were the only clan who dared dig too deep. In a forgotten age, perhaps a century before the Death War, there came a night when the Thunderroot excavators vanished. They had been carving tunnels into a mountain they named Velduruin, seeking an ancient vein of sky iron. What they uncovered instead was a hole that breathed. Those who entered it were never seen again. Those who remained above described a sound that wasn't a sound, a pulse, like the mountain had a heartbeat. And then the air changed. Gliders crashed. Birds flew in circles. Echoes ceased to return. The clans called it a wind stop. It lasted only a few hours. But in a society that worshipped the breath, it was worse than death. No enemy appeared. No beast attacked. The stillness itself was the threat. In response, a gathering was called atop the cloud bridge, where the clan leaders met only in times of omens. A decision was made. The hole in Velderuin would be sealed. The Thunderroot swore by their bones never to tunnel again. A wall was built, not of stone, but of gliders, spears, and breath charms. The site was cursed, buried, forgotten. But not all agreed. The Emberdrift, ever curious, kept sending scouts near the sealed site, hoping to harvest what they called Sky Shadow, a substance they claimed glowed only in silence. And the Hallowspire whispered among themselves that this event marked the return of the Deepkin. But it was the Windborn, the Readers of Change, who were most disturbed. Aina, the eldest Sky Seer, stood upon the tallest horn spire and tore her breath scrolls to the wind. Her warning, recorded in scattered verse, said, "The wind no longer returns what we send. Something beneath is listening. And be patient." The clans, however, did what they had always done in the face of uncertainty. They returned to their rivalries, their rituals, their winds. Velderuin was left sealed. But the silence beneath it was not dead. It was watching. It was not the thunder we feared. It was the day thunder went silent. Last words of Cyril, Windborn Skyseer. For nearly a generation after the sealing of Velderuin, the Sky clans returned to their precarious balance. Skirmishes resumed over sacred air paths. Glider duels were fought to settle insults. The rituals continued, marriages in midair, sky funerals into storm clouds, and oaths sworn on the breath of ancestors. But though the clans pretended normalcy, the wind had changed. It no longer whispered like it once had. The great thermals shifted subtly, unpredictably. The breath horns, once used to call across vast peaks, began to echo with delay, or sometimes not at all. In sacred places where the wind always blew, silence gathered like snow. The Windborn were the first to speak the truth aloud. The wind is dying. Aina, now ancient and blind, proclaimed the second omen had come. The sky, she said, is drawing breath not to speak, but to scream. Most ignored her. She was dismissed as a relic of a fading clan. But in the night, even the most hardened warriors began to listen to the wind more carefully, and they found it listening back. Then, on the third night of the blood moon, the wind stopped. Not slowed, not shifted, stopped. Across every peak and spire, every cliff village and wind shrine, the air went still. No fluttering feathers, no rippling cloaks. The gliders swayed in midair, unsupported by lift, before tumbling like stones into the abyss. Breath became difficult, not from cold, but from pressure. Something unseen was pressing down. The silence lasted exactly 7 minutes. No screams were heard. No prayers answered. And then the wind returned, wrong. It came howling not from above, but from below, carrying with it dust not of earth, but of something older. Bones, ash, an echo. The Hallowspire were the first to declare it. The Deepkin had awakened. At first, there were no armies. Only disappearances. Entire outposts found abandoned, ropes cut clean, no struggle. Glider trails ended midair. Hunters vanished without a whisper. Then came the shadows, creeping, twitching forms crawling along cliff faces, moving where they shouldn't. The Thunderroot miners reported sounds inside the mountains, voices speaking backwards. One by one, the sacred spires began to fall. The Cloud Piercers lost the hanging monastery to collapse from within. Its entire structure crumbled as if something had chewed through the stone. Emberdrift forges failed as the heat was drawn away. The Stormfang raiding parties returned from the skies bloodless, their bodies drained, not torn. Then came the Whisperkin, Deepkin mimics who wore no armor, but voices. They came in the shape of the dead, speaking in loved ones' tones, calling warriors by name. No spear could silence them. Many leapt from cliffs in madness. The clans, for the first time in living memory, stopped fighting one another. They gathered for the Breath Council, atop the last neutral peak, Chimera Crag. Only 5 of the original 7 clans remained. Thunderroot was gone. The Veil Walkers, long erased from memory, were spoken of again, not as traitors, but perhaps as prophets. Veil, a cloaked figure with no clan sigil, spoke only once. We waited too long. The silence is no longer beneath us. It is in our breath. And so, the clans agreed to the unthinkable. For the first time in their fractious history, they united, not as rivals, not even as allies, but as survivors. They called it not a war, but death. To fall is not death. To fall and live beneath, that is. Sky Clan's forbidden mantra death had no declaration. No horns. No drums. No banners. It began with breathlessness and ended with screams that never reached the air. When the 5 surviving Sky Clans forged their fragile pact atop Chimera Crag, they did so with broken traditions and borrowed courage. The clans, once obsessed with their sacred divisions, now found themselves forced into overlapping lives. Stormfang warriors guarding Windborn temples. Emberdrift smiths forging weapons from shattered Cloudpiercer relics. Hallowspire mourners performing rites for those they never knew. But the enemy was already among them. The Deepkin, if they could even be called a people, did not march. They infiltrated. They emerged from shadows, from cracks in stone, from beneath breath chambers once considered sacred. They had no shape of their own, but wore the forms of those they consumed. A warrior might awaken beside his sibling, only to find her eyes hollow, her voice echoing a half-second too late. One of the first true battles of the Death War was not fought with spears, but trust. The Windborn proposed a bitter solution. Mark the living with breath guts, carvings made into the ribs while chanting the breath litany. It was said that Deepkin could not mimic pain, nor remember the breath songs. The process was brutal. Many died from the ritual, but those who lived were trusted. Those who refused were cast into the clouds. Then came the first collapse. The Emberdrift Citadel, Volkaz, once the highest forged temple, exploded from within. Witnesses said the fires vanished in a single moment, consumed by a cold that shimmered blue, not black. No remains were found. Only a wind that screamed in a voice that was not wind. From that day, the clan ceased defending territory. They began defending altitude. A new belief emerged, that the Deepkin could not survive above a certain height. The few warriors who reached above the Starline peaks reported clarity. The wind behaved normally. No whispers, no mimicry. But such altitudes were almost unreachable, even for the most skilled gliders. Desperation took hold. The Stormfang proposed constructing a skyfort, an impossible structure suspended entirely in air, tethered between 3 peaks by the last bone cables. Thousands labored in silence, day and night, creating the floating bastion known as Terathkal. Here, they would make their last stand. Here, they believed the sky itself would shield them. But with unity came old wounds. The Cloudpiercers, stripped of their temples and pride, resented their loss of leadership. They accused the Windborn of having known this was coming and doing nothing. The Hallowspire refused to share their death rites with those who do not speak to bones. Tensions rose. Duels began anew. This time not for pride, but for dwindling breath masks and sky metal. And then, the second collapse. Chimera Crag, once the site of the Breath Council, simply vanished. Survivors from nearby peaks swore it didn't fall. It folded inward, as if swallowed by itself. The wind above that space no longer moved. Birds refused to fly near it. It was as if that part of the sky had died. The clans finally accepted what the Deepkin truly were. Silence made flesh. Memory makes predators. Hunger made God. Their purpose was not conquest. It was to be erased. And the Sky Clans, once immortalized by their rituals, now faced extinction, not by being defeated, but by being forgotten. You cannot slay the wind, but you can teach it to scream. Karun the Half-Sky, the death of Chimera Crag, shattered more than a mountain. It shattered belief. The Sky Clans had lived for centuries under the assumption that the breath was sacred, That wind was life. That air, not earth, was their covenant. But now, the wind had betrayed them. Or worse, it had been claimed by the enemy. In desperation, the clans turned to forbidden rites and half-remembered relics. The old stories spoke of the Breath Carvers, sky priests who once shaped the wind into weapons during the mythic War of Falling Stars. Their art had been outlawed for generations, said to twist the wind into madness. But now, nothing was too dangerous. The last known Breath Carver was found in exile atop a collapsing wind spire, a gaunt figure named Karun the Half-Sky. He had no clan, no voice. His lungs had long been scarred by unfiltered air. Yet he carved breath runes in the air with broken glider wings and whispered to currents that no longer flowed. And when asked if he could fight the Deepkin, he bled from the nose and simply wrote one word in the dust: yes. Under Karun's guidance, the clans began to forge wind blades, weapons not made of metal, but of solidified breath song and ancestral memory. They were weightless, invisible, but lethal to anything that echoed. The forging cost lives. It required the death of a volunteer, whose final breath would be bound into the blade. Only those with perfect memory and unshaken spirit could wield them. Only 13 were made. They became known as the 13 Screamers. Armed with these, the clans launched the first counterattack since the start of the death, the Bloodwind Raid. Using silence gliders crafted from storm kites, a strike force of 90 warriors descended upon Soth's Maw, a wound-like chasm where Deepkin were believed to emerge. What they found was not an army, but a nursery. The Deepkin did not reproduce like mortals. They grew from forgotten names. Each soul lost in silence, each ritual left incomplete, each breath taken in despair. These gave birth to new forms. Hundreds of them writhed in half-shape, clawing at the air for memories to devour. The raid was savage. The wind blades sang in silence, tearing through echo flesh like wind through snow. Soth's Maw burned with breath fire. The Deepkin, so dominant in shadow, shrieked when faced with shaped wind. It was not a victory, but it was painful. Only 16 Sky clansmen returned, but they returned with heads held high. The Bloodwind Raid changed everything. For the first time in decades, the sky rang with music, not screams. Songs were written. Names of the fallen were carved into windstone. A new rite was born, the Breath Pyre, where warriors sang their own death dirge before battle, ensuring their name would never be forgotten, even if they fell. The Deepkin, once thought immune to fear, withdrew. The Windborn claimed it was because the sky had remembered itself. The Stormfang said it was the scent of real war. The Hallowspire, always closest to death, whispered of something deeper. The Deepkin were not wounded by the blades. They were wounded by our refusal to be silent. But even in this fragile triumph, there was a cost. Karun the Half-Sky did not survive the forging of the last Windblade. His lungs collapsed from the pressure. Before he died, he left behind a map not of peaks, but of wounds. He had traced the places where the sky was dying. It pointed to one place, one peak, Veldarwin, the sealed mountain, the place where it had all begun. The clans knew what it meant. To end the death, they would have to go back, into the deep. It is not darkness that lives below. It is a memory stripped of mercy. Elder Aina, last of the Windborn Veldarwin, was not just a mountain. It was a wound in the sky, once sealed by Aina and the other ancients. It had remained untouched for nearly 60 years. No clan flew above it. No wind was felt near its crown. Even birds refused its airspace. Now, with the Deepkin awakening and the wind itself faltering, the clans had no choice. They would have to open the scar. A war council was held at Terathkal, the Skyfort. Of the 5 remaining clans, 4 agreed to the mission. The 5th, Cloudpiercers, refused. Their leader, Vake Torgai, declared, "We seal things for a reason. We buried Veldarwin, so we wouldn't have to remember." He was ignored. The expedition was led by Rava Stormfist, a blunt, flame-scarred warrior of the Ember Drift. At her side were Lyaran, a Windborn whisper priest who could speak the old sky scripts, Cash of the Hollow, a death singer who carried the bones of his ancestors in his cloak, named the Screamer, wielder of the third Windblade, and a reluctant guide. Then the Unnamed, a silent survivor found near Hymira Crag, who had forgotten his clan, but remembered the way. They descended on foot, roped together across the jagged ridges and mist-filled crevasses of Veldurin. The air here was wrong, not stale, but curiously hollow, as if it was being held for something. Breath became effort. Memories flickered. Songs half-forgotten came unbidden. Then came the whispers, not the Deepkin themselves, but their wake. Voices of the dead spoke in familiar tones. Lioran heard his mother's lullabies from the walls. Rava tasted blood in her mouth and didn't know whose it was. Cash wept silently as his ancestors' bones grew cold in his cloak. Inside the mountain, they found the truth. Veldaruin had once been a city, not of stone or steel, but of air and memory, carved into vast wind chambers by ancient sky clans before history, long before the division of tribes, before breathrights, before war. Here, they had once lived together. No clans, no names, just Skyborn. And here, the first Deepkin had been born. Lioran discovered murals burned into the walls, images of ritual gone wrong. A chorus of breath-seers, singing to the upper wind and awakening something beneath. A response came, not in voice, but in echo. It did not end. It grew. The Deepkin were not demons. They were the sky's memory of pain. Every betrayal, every forgotten oath, every silence where the song should have been. And in Veldaruin's heart, they found it, the first echo. It was not a creature. It had no shape, no form, just presence, like a pressure in the skull, a feeling in the bones, a weight behind the eyes. They called it Ilmvor, that which remembers for us. Nain struck at it with his windblade. It shrieked without sound, and Nain fell, not from injury, but from the theft of his name. His eyes went blank. His scream faded. His windblade shattered into feathers. Rava, wounded and weeping, made the only choice left. She ordered the breath seal to be reforged, not to contain Ilmvor, but to bind part of the sky itself to the Sky Clan's will. Cash sang his ancestors' names in reverse. Lioran carved a wind script into his own lungs. Thren, who had no name to give, gave his life. The seal held, for now, but as they climbed back to the surface, only Rava and Cash remained, and the sky above was bleeding. Not all echoes come from enemies. Some come from those we trusted most. Cash of the Hollow, when Rava Stormfist and Cash returned from Veldaruin, they were no longer heroes. They were suspects. The story they brought back, of a sky city lost, of the first echo named Ilmvor, of a sealed memory that birthed the Deepkin, was too terrible to accept. Many in the clans, already stretched thin by fear and silence, could not bear the truth. And those who refused to believe it, they blamed Rava for bringing the Deepkin closer. At the Skyfort of Terethkal, the Breath Council fell into chaos. The Windborn demanded more Windblades, but the Breath Carvers were gone. The Hallowspire asked to mourn the Veldaruin fallen, but their bones had never been returned. The Stormfang, proud and vengeful, began arming for full-scale war. It was then the Cloudpiercers returned. Led by Vake Torgai, now older, gaunter, and wearing robes not of any clan, the Cloudpiercers offered a solution. They had not remained idle. In secret, they had forged an alliance with a new order of Skywalkers who called themselves the Voiceless Crown. These mystics claimed they could commune directly with the breath beyond, a divine current beyond mortal wind. They offered purity, a wind cleansed of echoes, safe from the Deepkin's reach. But there was a cost. The old rites had to be burned. All breath names forgotten. No more singing. No more memory. Only silence. Some called it madness. Others called it salvation. At the summit of Windgrave, a sacred sky plateau where treaties were once written in vapor ink, a gathering of clans was called. The choice was to be made. Follow the Voiceless Crown and abandon the breath traditions. Or follow the remnants, led by Ravo and Cash, and prepare for total war against the Deepkin. The gathering never reached a vote. That night, as winds howled unnaturally high, a storm of black feathers rained across Windgrave. The air turned heavy. Breath masks failed. And out of the fog came figures shaped like friends. The Deepkin had come, but they were not alone. The Cloud-piercers, believing the voiceless crown's promise, opened the seals guarding the mountain winds, hoping to usher in the breath beyond. Instead, they let the Deepkin ride the storm directly into Wingrave. The massacre was swift. Over half the Sky Clan's elders perished. Ritual chambers were torn from their moorings and dropped into the clouds. The air above the mountains split like a cracked mirror. Rava fought through fire and echo, dragging Cash from the ruins. Together, they formed the Breath's Hard Circle, a warband of survivors bound by name, not clan. They swore vengeance on both the Deepkin and the traitors who wore silence like salvation. The betrayal of Wingrave fractured the last of the old unity. From that day, the Sky Clans were no longer five. There were many broken fragments with shared wounds, but no banner. Yet in the ashes of the betrayal, something new stirred. Rava's vision hardened. Cash's songs turned into weapons. And in the depths of the ruined sky, a whisper came not from the Deepkin, but from something older. Something to watch. The war was no longer for survival. It was for the soul of the sky itself. We are no longer clans. We are no longer windy. We are the scream that will not be silenced. Oath of the Breath's Hard Circle in the smoldering ruins of Wingrave. The sky no longer held meaning. The betrayal had ripped apart the last bonds of the ancient Sky Clans. Rituals were desecrated. Ancestral altars shattered. Echo rot spread into the upper thermals, infecting air once thought sacred. And yet, amidst the collapse, something stubborn refused to die. Rava Stormfist called it the last sky. A belief not in tradition, nor in prophecy, but in fury, in memory as a weapon, in unity born not from blood, but from shared loss. From Windgrave's ashes, she and Cash the Hollow called together all survivors, wanderers, and oath-breakers willing to resist silence. They called themselves the Breath's Hard Circle. They wore no sigils. They answered to no clan. But each carried a shard of wind glass etched with the names of those they failed to save. These shards hummed faintly in stormlight, reminders and promises. They were joined by others. Era 10 Knives, a sky thief who stole a Deepkin echo staff and reversed its resonance. Elon of the Hallowspire, whose entire family had been devoured by forgotten songs. Sethran Vale, a former Cloud-piercer who had seen the lies of the voiceless crown and now bore his broken silence mask as a trophy. Together, they began the Sky-burning campaign. They would not hide. They would not defend. They would hunt. Using relics from Vel'Daruin and techniques drawn from Karun's lost breath scrolls, the Breath's Hard Circle launched raids into corrupted wind zones. Their tactics were brutal and brilliant. Echo nests were shattered. Deepkin spawn routes were severed. The Breath Singers composed new war dirges that burned memory clean when sung in unison. But victories came at a cost. Each battle drained them, physically, spiritually. The Windblades were few. The Deepkin adapted. For every sky reclaimed, another would bleed. And worse, echo poisoning began to manifest. Fighters who had stared too long into Deepkin's eyes began losing language. They forgot names mid-sentence. Some wept for people who never existed. One warrior, when asked his name, simply answered, "I was a wind once." The Breath's Hard Circle knew time was not on their side. It was Elon of the Hallowspire who proposed the final plan, one born of desperation and madness. Deep in the broken vaults beneath Vel'Daruin lay a forgotten structure known only as the Ansible Gate, an ancient conduit, older than the clans, designed to amplify breath across great distances. If they could reach it, awaken it, and sing the names of the lost, perhaps the echoes would turn on themselves. Perhaps memory could unmake what memory had birthed. But there was a catch. The Ansible Gate could only be opened by a sacrifice of names. One whose memory was vast. One who bore not just their own soul, but the lineage of thousands. Cash the Hollow volunteered. His cloak held the bones of 17 generations, each inscribed with breath script. He had walked the Hollow Spiral for over 50 years, collecting stories, names, echoes. He alone carried the weight of sky history. Rava wept. Cash smiled. "If I forget, then let the sky remember me." The sky does not forget, but we do. This is why we must remember it, through fire, through song, through sacrifice. Cash the hollow. The path to the Ansible Gate was one not even the Deepkin dared follow. It lay beneath Velduruin's hollow root, a spiral carved by air older than wind, the vault of voiceless stone. There, even the sound became suspect. Words fractured in the throat. Names fell apart on the tongue. Only breath remained, dry and thin like brittle parchment. The breath's hard circle descended in silence. Rava led. Cash walked behind her, whispering the names of the dead, not to guide him, but to keep himself whole. They were accompanied by Sethrin Vale, whose broken silence mask now glowed faintly as it neared the gate, Era 10 Knives, carrying the last remaining Windglass bomb, forged from a fallen sky comet, and a newly joined soul, Thal the Skyrend, a half-echo warrior born from a failed Deepkin fusion, neither enemy nor friend, but determined to end what had begun with him. As they reached the vault's core, they saw it, the Ansible Gate. Not a structure, but a living convergence of breath and memory, a great gyre of crystal and smoke, pulsing in rhythm with something beyond mortal lungs. Around it floated echoes frozen in time, moments of ancient joy, agony, war, birth, betrayal, all flickering like stormlight reflections in broken mirrors. This was what Deepkin fed on. This was their cradle. The gate could be activated, but it came with rules. The first rule, a voice must speak the breath line, an unbroken recitation of Sky Clan's founding. The second rule, that voice must be offered to the gate. The third rule, once opened, the gate could not be closed without consuming either all echoes or all memories. Cash began to sing. He sang not in strength, but in memory, of clans that once danced above cloud beds, of children whose names had been lost to wind, of lovers who'd vanished during the first silence. His cloak trembled. His bones lit up like constellations. The gate responded. It unfolded like a flower made of storm glass and grief. From its center, a wind emerged that was older than song, the primordial breath. It whispered truths never spoken. The Deepkin were not enemies. They were reminders of every vow broken, every name erased, every silence left unchecked. To destroy them was not to kill a foe. It was to accept what had been done, to remember it fully, forever. Rava stepped forward. Then let the sky remember us. Era threw the Windglass bomb into the gyre. It shattered in slow motion, its fragments absorbed by the gate. Sethrin chanted in inverted silence, a technique stolen from the voiceless crown, now twisted to suit breath once more. Thal, half-echo, walked into the core and vanished, laughing. Cash's song reached its peak. He named every fallen warrior, every forgotten child. Every silence was kept for survival. His breath faltered. His bones cracked. And finally, as his last breath escaped, the gate sang back. A scream of sky, memory, grief, and forgiveness. Across the upper winds, the Deepkin began to fracture. Their forms rippled. Their names turned against them. Some vanished. Others knelt. A few held once, and were gone. The gate had awakened. The sky had remembered. But Cash was no more. Only his cloak remained, now empty of bones. The last line of his song etched into it. Let me be wind. The sky has a memory, but some things even it tries to forget. Era 10 Knives, the Ansible Gate, had sung. The echoes had shattered. Cash was gone. And for one brief, breathless moment, the sky was still. But stillness, in the high winds, is not peace. It is a warning. From the outer drift zones, beyond the reach of even the oldest cloud forts, a storm began to gather. Not born of wind or weather, but of names denied, forgotten, buried. The Deepkin, what remained of them, had not died. They had awakened something worse. A being older than echoes. A god of silence never named. The Sky Clans once had a term in the old breath script for it. Unbreath. The moment before the first word. The silence before the scream. The breath's hard circle watched as the edges of the world darkened. Stars blinked out. Winds curled in on themselves. Breath masks failed before being worn. Children began weeping for parents long dead, some never born. The unbreath was coming. It did not speak. It did not kill. It is unmade. And it was drawn directly to the Ansible Gate, to memory. The last Skyholds Rava Stormfist called for a final gathering. Only 3 Skyholds remained untouched. Carval, a floating furnace where storm steel was once forged. Aura's Watch, a glider fortress that could only land once every 12 moons. And the Morn Spire, built on the spine of a dead sky beast, now repurposed as a refuge for orphans of Echo War. Rava's message was simple: we cannot win, but we can choose what is remembered. From every broken clan came remnants. From the shattered Stormfang came the Windrunners, barefoot warriors who sang while they ran. From the silenced, voiceless crown came 3 defectors, bleeding mist from their mouths, desperate to atone. From the Hollow Spire came children who had already lost too much and refused to lose more. Together, they built the Memory Flare, a weapon not of fire, but of remembrance. Fused with the last spark of the Ansible Gate, it could send a single breath line into the sky, one so bright, so truthful, it would either banish the unbreath or be the last thing the sky ever heard. But to use it, someone had to anchor it from the heart of the storm. Rava did not hesitate. She wore Kasha's cloak. She carried the breath shard of every lost warrior. And etched across her skin in sky ink were the new names. Names born from the war, names never recorded in song, names the unbreath had never stolen. Names like Era, Elon, Sephirin, Thal. If silence wants us forgotten, she said, then let it choke on every one of our names. As the storm approached, the wind screamed. Clouds bled downward. Even the sky beasts fled. Rava walked into the heart of it. At her back, the memory flare charged. At her front, the unbreath loomed, a shape made of absence, a void that tore song from sky. She began to speak, not in poetry, not in ritual, but in truth. I am Rava, daughter of Yen, sister to no clan, wife to the wind. I remember the sky when it was bright. I remember when it wept. And I remember you. You were silent. Your absence. You cowered. The memory flare ignited. For one blinding moment, the sky was filled with everything, every name, every song, every wound, every kiss, every betrayal. All at once, the unbreath screamed, then cracked, like thin ice over fire. And then it broke. And then, for the first time in generations, the wind exhaled. Final line of the breath's hard codex silence. Not the cruel silence of the deepkin, not the hollow void of the unbreath, but true stillness. The kind that comes after fire has burned its last coal, after war has spent its final scream. The unbreath had cracked, and with it, the echo plague dissolved. Across the highlands, sky beasts returned to their drifting paths. The stormglass trees of Velduruin bloomed, with breath fruit once more. And the Ansible Gate, its task complete, closed itself, its last whisper a soft thank you sung into the void. But Rava Stormfist was gone. Nobody. No trace. Only her cloak, still warm, caught in a breeze that wasn't there a moment ago. The breath's hard circle did not mourn her as lost. They rode her into the wind. Her name became the first line of the new breath line. The Age of Sky remnants. What followed was not peace. Not entirely. But it was something closer to living. The clans did not reform. Too much had been broken. Too much reimagined. Instead, new societies formed. Loose networks of windwalkers, singers, salvagers, and loreweavers. They called themselves the Sky Remnants. Not because they were leftovers, but because they chose to remember what had almost been lost. They rebuilt. Not the floating palaces of old, but wind-rooted sanctuaries, designed to be light, mobile, breathable. Knowledge was passed orally again, but now everyone learned every clan's breathline. No name was held above another. No silence permitted to grow. At the heart of it all stood the breath's hard archives, a living library carved into the bones of the Morn Spire, humming with every name that had ever been spoken, and even those once forgotten. The return of the songs the breath singers returned, but not as warriors. Now, they were healers, memory keepers, and guides. Eratin Knives took up the mantle of Wind Mother, teaching new generations to craft wind glass from skyfire and laughter. Elon of the Hallowspire trained the Listenborn, children gifted with the rare ability to hear echoes without losing themselves. And Sethrin Vale, the former voiceless, carved a new silence mask, not to hide speech, but to amplify truths too heavy for voice alone. Even Thal's descendants, echo-touched yet whole, walked the wind now without fear. They were called Skybound, and it was said the storms whispered stories to them when they dreamed. And the sky remembered the skies still changed. Storms still came. But now, every wind carried with it a fragment of song, a sliver of memory. The Ansible Gate was never seen again. But sometimes, on the highest thermals, a single name could be heard spoken by the clouds, Rava. And those who heard it knew the war was over. The clans were gone. But the sky remembered. And so did they. Legends are not truths. They are how truth learns to fly. Elder Weavesayer of the Cloudmere years passed. The war faded from immediate memory, but it never vanished. The sky remnants passed their stories not through books or breath shards alone, but through song, stone, and flesh. Children were born not under clan banners, but beneath open sky, swaddled in winds that no longer feared their own name. But myths, like clouds, always gather again. Myths of the new sky in the floating sanctuary of Driftspire Hollow. A child named Lirin was born. He could hear names in the rustle of leaves. He claimed he dreamt of a woman with hair like storm ribbons, who whispered to him in a language made of sky. When the Breathshard Circle investigated, they found Lirin could recite the entire first breath line, word perfect, despite never being taught. He became the first Breathborn, a soul believed to carry an echo of one who had vanished in sacrifice. Many believed he was Rava reborn. Other myths rose, a storm that never stopped circling the remains of Carval, crackling with the laughter of Thal. A mist-wrapped island where former deepkin walked in silence, no longer enemies, but mourners of their own making. And on certain nights, a wind would carry a voice that said only, "I remember." Not all believed these tales, but all respected them. Because the sky remnants knew now, to forget was death, to remember was survival. The ritual of names every 12 moons, all remnants, scattered though they were, sent one representative to the Mornspire archives. There, beneath the vault of breathing stone, each would light a flame and speak a name lost during the war of the breathless sky. No name was ever repeated. It is said that when the final name is spoken and the final silence broken, the sky will sing again, not as it did before, but as it was always meant to. The ritual was never skipped. Not once. Legacy and Feather and Flame Windriders returned, no longer as scouts of war, but as messengers of peace. They bore cloaks woven from echo feathers, which shimmered with the memories of every journey they took. If a Windrider fell, their cloak was burned, and the smoke was said to whisper their story to the skies. Era's daughter, Jan the Clear-Eyed, became the first to circle the entire known sky realm on breath alone. When asked why, she said, "To remind the wind it still has room for joy." The sky remembers Sethrin Vale, older now, silent always, took his final breath beside the gate's last known fragment, a sliver embedded in the Cloudmere. He placed his silence mask upon it, and as he died, the shard glowed one last time. It hummed the name Cash. No one knows how it happened. No one asked, because some truths are not questions. They are gifts. And so the story ends, not with a battle, nor a victory, but with a sky that breathes again. A sky that remembers, people who speak, and wind that finally carries no silence at all. What we leave behind is not stone, nor steel, but breath, carried forward. Fragment from the final Wind Codex generations past. The events of the Death War became distant, the kind of tale told beside firelight in drifting sky vessels, where children pressed hands to the hull and whispered, "Tell me again about Rava." But unlike the old ages, these stories were not locked in temple chambers or hoarded by sky priests. They belonged to everyone. In a village carved from a fallen sky beast's ribcage, a child asked, "Did the Unbreath ever come back?" And the elder smiled and said, "No, but sometimes we forget too much." And that's when silence begins again. The lesson was not to fear silence, but to break it with song, with names, with truth. The sky's new shape, no one built skyholds anymore. Instead, they grew wind temples, organic and alive, shaped from songwood and guided by breath paths. These homes listened. They remembered. They could even weep when a loved one passed. The wind was no longer a force to be tamed, but a partner, a listener, a guardian. Gliders drifted not for war, but for communion. Even the ancient term clan was replaced by breathkin, those bound by memory, not blood. Each person carried a whisper stone, carved with their chosen name. Upon death, the stone was cast into the upper currents, where it would hum a final note before dissolving into mist. And the sky remembered it all. A final myth, they say, that in the highest place, above even the Cloudmere Rift, there is a current no one can map. It circles endlessly, a ribbon of mist and wind and memory. Some call it Rava's Path. Others simply call it the Breath Eternal. It is said that if you follow it far enough, for long enough, the wind will begin to speak your name before you say it aloud. And when it does, you are home. Final words. Thus ends the legend of the Sky Clans, of the war they fought, the silence they defied, and the names they saved. Not with thrones, not with victories carved into steel, but with wind and with breath.